Day 46, Proud Boys trial. We're checking in with Roger, who is live tweeting this again. And yesterday when we left off, there was a sick juror who got excused. We don't know why they were sick, but apparently they're back today. We also had Zach Reel, who had pink eye rumored. He's back in court too. So we had a couple of sick individuals who are back in session. Roger Parloff is also on Lawfare. Make sure you're giving him a follow at lawfareblog.com. Now, he tells us that we might hear from a confidential human source today, which we will. He said that Smith, the lawyer for Ethan Nordine, in his opening statement a long time ago, back in January, for goodness sake, said that he was going to show the jurors evidence of a text message sent by a Proud Boy government informant to his handler after the breach. So we want to make good on that promise. And we didn't hear the opening statement. We weren't covering it back then because this was kind of a normal case. It was a paint by numbers case until we started to explode the FBI nefariousness and their misdeeds after FBI agent Nicole Miller accidentally disclosed it in that Excel file spreadsheet. So we're coming back and we're asking who is going to be testifying. Now, yesterday when the juror was sick, we were speculating that the defense was asking for a replacement juror, the alternate, to be put in because they did not like the sick juror. We didn't know what that juror looked like or what their pronouns were, what their hair color was or whatever, and whether that would have been a good juror for the Proud Boys or a bad juror for the Proud Boys. But when that juror was sick, the defense was like, she's sick. That's it. She's done. Okay. She's probably going to die. Just forget about her. We'll get somebody else in here. May she rest in peace. Okay. Get the other person in. And then the prosecutors were like, hold on a minute. She's going to be fine. Okay, I'll go give her CPR. We'll drag her back in here if we have to. She's going to be great. And we don't know what it was, but Roger confirms that. He says that the prosecutor did not sound thrilled by that prospect yesterday. Says the reluctance might be born of the prospect of losing that juror. The attorneys have that info, but we don't. Now we're back in session. Defendant Reel is seated in court, not sick anymore. And we have to ask ourselves if we have a full jury panel. Judge Kelly comes back on the bench. All rise. Please be seated. Judge says, all right. So we had a short day yesterday. I had a nice afternoon nap. Good to see everybody again. Says, it looks like we're back on track. I just heard from our clerk that the juror is back. So we're not going to have to make an alternate here. And it looks like Defendant Reel is here. Good to see you, Mr. Reel. So what do we have before we get started? Says that now we want to discuss an instruction. Norm Pattis raises his hand. He's a defense attorney for Biggs. And they want to give jurors an instruction about the First Amendment. The prosecutor says no problem about that. We can tell them in the jury that there is no objection. And Nick Smith from Ethan Nordine's counsel wants to make a point on the sidebar. Picks up the phones. Sidebar, they're on the phones. They're talking. Don't know what's happening there, but they're having a conversation about Nick Smith, between Nick Smith and the prosecutor, Connor Monroe. Phones go down. Witness takes the stand. Defense says, Your Honor, we called this person. Don't know who it is yet. It's a white man, stocky, short hair, dark suit, white shirt, no tie. Sidebar has ended. Jury comes in. Judge tells the jurors, says, ladies and gentlemen, this is a witness for the defendant, Ethan Nordine. Remember, we've got 5 co-defendants. They've got various people that they are presenting, and we don't know who is whose witness and who's cross-examining what other person's witness, and there's a bunch of different arrows flying all over the place in the case. Nick Smith calls Aaron. Witness identifies himself as Aaron. Hello, Aaron. Hello. I want to ask you about when you joined the Proud Boys. When was that? He says, that was about the spring 2019. And you came to Washington, D.C. on January 6th? Yeah. And you had a reporting relationship with the FBI at that time? Is that right? A reporting relationship? He says, yeah. I was a confidential human source. So that is an interesting witness because this witness is a defense witness They have called this person, but this person is also a confidential human source, so he's kind of not a real friendly witness. He's kind of somebody who worked for the government. Not kind of, did. As a confidential human source. There was an official reporting relationship then. So he's therefore the defense technically. But he was useful against the defense. And so we're trying to fit this guy in. Whose witness is he? Is he more sympathetic to the government? Is he more sympathetic to the defense? Are they calling him to say this was an informant and try to make him look bad? Or are they going to make him look good? What's going to happen? He tells them, I was a confidential human source. What does that mean when you're a confidential human source? He says, well, I had a relationship with primarily one FBI agent. So you met with him regularly? Yeah, only him? Well, sometimes someone else would show up with him. And what would you call this person who was your primary agent? He says, we call him the, quote, handler agent. So he would handle you. He said, can you tell me about your relationship with your handler in January 6th? He says, sure. Well, I was asked by my handler if I was planning to go on January 6th, and I said yes. An agent asked me to see if I could locate someone in D.C. He said that had nothing to do with the Proud Boys, though. And he was asking if we could say why they were there. My handler agent before January 6th, are you planning to go? If you're going, can you check into somebody else for us? Sure, happy to do that. Did your handler agent ask you to march with the Proud Boys? No, he didn't. Now, when you went to D.C., was there an expectation that you would report back? He says, yeah. Yeah, if there was violence, they would have wanted me to report that back to them. Anything else they'd want you to report? Well, if there was an emergency situation, I mean, if I was there to protect myself, if I had to protect myself from physical harm, I wouldn't get in trouble if I did something like that. So you could do something problematic. You could break the law. He says, well, I could do little things, like petty vandalism, like spray painting, stuff like that. If I was doing it in an act of self-preservation. So kind of like if you were doing it to fit in or something, you could do that. Yeah. Now, this authorization to do this petty vandalism and this spray painting, was that only related to Antifa? Yeah. So tell me when you got to Washington, D.C. I got there about January 5th. And what did you do there when you got there? Well, we didn't know specifics. We just kind of got there and we found out that we would try to meet up with other Proud Boys. We learned on January 6th to meet at the Washington Monument at about 10 a.m. He says, great, I want to show you this video clip. In the video, Aaron's on the camera. Aaron says on screen, he says, it was a large group of people milling about. At that point, I don't think anyone knew what was going on. We were just there at the meeting. What happens next? He says, well, we were waiting for someone to come along and tell us what to do. We were waiting for leadership at that time. Were you along the entire march from the Washington Monument to the Capitol? Yeah. Were you able to observe the leadership? Yeah. I want to jump forward in this video. Here in this video, I want to circle this group of people. Is this leadership? He says, yeah. And when you guys were marching, you were taking photos along the way? Yeah. Did you have any understanding as to the purpose of walking towards the Capitol? No. Did being seen involve opportunities to have photographs taken? Yeah. He says, well, we were going to have some pictures taken. We were going to be staying behind and ahead of the group, and then we were going to be listening. We were asked to stop. We didn't have an understanding of any other reason to be walking to the Capitol. We were just walking. What's happening in the video now? He says, well, now we're at the food trucks. And then they're after the food trucks. What's your group doing? He says, well, the group reformed up again cohesively. We walked back towards the Capitol and we were chanting. Well, how would you describe the scene? Typical food truck scene, guys standing around conversing. We were kind of deciding what to do. I was tired. My boots were new. I was taking ibuprofen. You know how it is. And nothing led you to believe at this point that the reason for being there was different from just taking photos, was it? You were just there taking pictures. No, nothing else at this point. Was there any reason to believe that you were getting ready to walk to the Capitol to invade the building? No. Defense attorney says, Aaron, was there any reason to believe that the Proud Boy crowd was marching to the Capitol in order to interfere with law enforcement or members of Congress? No answer on that, but I'm presuming he said no. And you were interviewed by an agent after J6? Yeah. Was that in April of 2021? Yeah. I want to show you a transcript of that. You recognize this? Yeah. What's the date on this? April 5th, 2021. Would it refresh your recollection of whether there was a plan to occupy the area in front of the Capitol? Transcript of the interview with an FBI agent. He says, yes. Yeah, we were not going to occupy the area in front of the Capitol. So he reads the transcript. The transcript, he's talking to an FBI agent back in April, years ago. And, oh yeah, I told him we were not going to occupy the area in front of the Capitol. Good, you said that 2 years ago. You're saying it again now. Thank you. So where did your group end up? Well, the group ended up on the left, right on the left of the Washington Monument, on the right, off the gate and just to the side. You remember a roundabout where you were walking? Not off the top of my head. I think there was a water fountain not too far away. Do you have a personal relationship with my client, Ethan Nordine? No. Enrique Tarrio, another defendant? No. Joe Biggs? No. Zach Reel? No. Any member of the Ministry of Self-Defense? No. Are you in any Telegram chats relating to the Ministry of Self-Defense? No. Are Boots on the Ground chat? No. Are you in any Proud Boy Telegram chats? Well, it was in some Proud Boy chats. One was open to the general public. They were very generic, nothing to do with going to DC. I want to show you a picture now, a video, of the Peace Monument scene just before the breach. You recognize this? Yeah. I'm circling this. Do you recognize this? Yeah, this is Ethan Nordine. He's standing in the crowd. Is this guy one of the people leading the march? He says, yeah. Did you know him by name? I think that's Ethan Nordine, yeah. Did you know him by another name? I think it was Rufio. Do you recall being with the marching group at this traffic circle? Aaron says, yeah. But I was further back, I think about 2/3 of the way back. Now Aaron's drawing on the screen. He says, well, I think Nordine is up here. And I'm much further back. Now, at the time of the breach, can you tell me what you were thinking? He says, yeah, I was confused. I was surprised. Says, I didn't know what was going on. So when in that state of confusion, did you reach out to your FBI handler agent? He said, yeah, I did. I reached out. I communicated to him. I said, hey, Proud Boys didn't do this. It was herd mentality. Something to that effect. He says it looked like Trump supporters who had walked up judging from their flags. But he said that he told his FBI agents, Proud Boys didn't do this. Defense attorney says, thank you for that. I want to show you an exhibit now. You recognize this? He says, yeah. Looks like a message sent at 12:02 p.m. What does that say? He says, Proud Boys did not do it, nor inspire, period. The crowd did it as a herd mentality, not organized. Barriers were down at the Capitol building. Crowd surged forward, almost to the building now. When was that? Timestamp says 12:02 p.m. And now you were texting somebody who was 1 hour behind you, right? Yeah. So it was successfully sent at 1:02 p.m. He said, yeah. And by the way, I sent it late. He said so many people had cell phones, it was slowing down the cell phone service. Or maybe there was another reason they took down the cell phone towers. Trump drove by in his beast. That also took out the cell phone towers. But people were not able to communicate. But this individual, Aaron, FBI informant, told his FBI handler the day of, Proud Boys did not do it nor inspire it. Crowd did it. Barriers were down at the Capitol. Crowd surged forward. So what happened next, says the defense attorney? Well, I started walking with the group and I was observing what was going on. Not sure what to do. So I sent a message because I'd been told that if I found myself in an emergency situation, I should reach out. The FBI says, you better contact us. Now he says, what was it about Trump supporters that made you think they were responsible for the breach? He says, well, the movement of the flags made it look like they got in front of us. And then there was a pause. But I was far enough back that I was only going by the movement of the flags, and I just saw Trump flags. Were members of your group carrying any flags, Aaron? Yeah. And did you enter the Capitol building? Yeah. I wasn't going to at first, but then it was under the understanding that if I could prevent someone from destroying something of historic significance, I should. If I could prevent someone from destroying something of historic significance, I should. You did enter the building. Now, I don't know, let's see where this goes, but I don't know if it's meaning the FBI or the government told him to go in there in order to prevent someone from destroying something of historic significance, because a lot of other J6ers who've been charged with crimes also had that same justification for being there, and they've been charged. Someone else mentioned that, boy, I hope they're not destroying things of historic significance. So I thought that could justify going in. And I got inside and there was a small room on the right. It kind of looked like a waiting room. Then I saw a man fighting with a police officer in a tug of war over a chair. I went over there and I did something that caused the man to run away. Smith says, okay, I want to show you a video now. Is this you, Aaron? Yeah. Was this inside the Capitol? Yeah. Was this recorded on your phone? Yeah. Do you know where you were? He says, yeah, I was down the stairs from where I placed my hands on the shoulders of the guy fighting the police. About 10 to 15 minutes after I entered the building, I'd guess that I was in the building a total of 20 minutes. So when you decided to go into the building, was that part of an agreement with anyone in the Proud Boys? Did they tell you to do that? No. Did you have any interactions with a police officer while you were inside? He says, yeah, I did. While I was exiting, I was letting an officer know that as I walked by that we'd cleared out people from the downstairs area who'd been going against the cops and letting them know that areas were safe as we were exiting. I want to play this video for you. It's a body camera video, Officer Alioto's body camera. They're in the basement of the Capitol. Aaron is approaching the line officers, approaching line of officers to leave. He's got orange tape on his ski cap, wearing a tactical vest. Aaron says something like the following. He says to the police, Proud Boys were able to get people to stand down against the police. Wow, that's nice. The Proud Boys FBI informant communicates to the police in the middle of January 6th that the Proud Boys were able to get people to stand down against the police. Kind of the opposite of what they're being charged for here. So did you decide to leave, Aaron? Yeah, I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to. The situation was changing. Now, what was the FBI and their expectation of you when people were going over the barriers? What was your understanding at that point? He says, well, if I saw a crime committed and was asked about it, to truthfully respond. After I left the Capitol, I went back to Subways and then to our residence. I went home the next day. Now, something comes in about an agents wanted to talk to you about it, something about 10 days of getting home. He says, yeah, they wanted to talk to me pretty quickly. And did they want to talk to you a second time? He says, yeah, about April 2021, they wanted to talk to me again. How about another time, a third time after that? He says, yeah, they wanted to talk to me again, August 2021. FBI agents and a prosecutor or a lawyer of some kind, they wanted to come and talk to me. That's weird. They wanted to talk to him 3 times? His informant. He's an informant with the FBI, don't know what his current relationship is. But they ask, now, you're not a member of the Proud Boy leadership, are you? Correct. No further questions, Your Honor. Sidebar. They have a conversation about this. Carmen Hernandez is next up. She's representing Zachary Rehl, who is back in court. Says the following. Aaron, you don't know him, do you? Pointing to Zachary Rehl. Correct. You were in the Capitol about what, 20 minutes? Yeah. Now, you believe that if you did something minor, you wouldn't get in trouble, right? If it kept me safe. I was told to explicitly be okay with doing minor things. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't told to explicitly be okay with doing minor things only if it kept me safe. I wasn't told to be explicitly okay with doing minor things. And when you entered the Capitol, you thought that was something minor? Objection! Overruled. No, I was thinking maybe I could prevent important things from being destroyed. No further questions. And I can imagine that Carmen Hernandez is going to hit that one hard in closing. Yeah, her client also was there, thinking that there would be no real repercussions for entering the Capitol, that it would be something minor, and that it would be justified, just like this was justified, if it could be preventing important things from being destroyed. And this witness also came out and communicated that the Proud Boys, on the day of this so-called insurrection, were getting people to stand down against the police, asking people to stand down, stand by, help bring a situation calmly to a close, and didn't get charged with anything. In fact, was there, probably getting paid by the FBI. We'll see. No further questions. Hernandez is done. 10-minute break, says the judge. Everybody goes, uses the bathroom, catches their breath, and we return. Judge Kelly's back on the bench. Defense attorney Nick Smith says, Your Honor, I would just want to lodge an objection here. There are chat messages that the prosecutor wants to use on cross-examination. They came up, they showed me that they want to use this list of stuff to go and hit Aaron on cross-examination because the direct exam is done. Defense says, I'm just seeing these right now. They didn't show me these yesterday. We told them that this was going to be our witness. They were supposed to show us these text messages during cross-examination. He says certain words would expose my client's identity. Of course, Aaron is testifying under a pseudonym. He says, I also object to the ones that would identify him. I also object to the political texts. But the prosecutor says, Your Honor, hello. We think that these are relevant to his bias and his credibility. It's always relevant. I provided these yesterday upon the conclusion of the direct exam. I provided these upon conclusion of direct, as is the uniform practice in this case. He says they just finished right now. The rules say I should give it to him as soon as they're done. I just gave it to him. There's nothing else that I need to do, Judge. I'm perfectly fine with this, and you should allow these messages in. He says, by the way, one of these is a portion of a Proud Boys chat group that this witness was in. One includes a statement of Chris Cooney about what he expects for January 6th. Cooney, apparently in the message, anticipates, quote, violence so utterly massive that we send a message. He says, we think these bear on his credibility. He says, Mr. Smith put this witness forward as an agent of the government. One of the close associates who he spent the whole day with on J6 was talking in these terms, and he didn't see fit to share these with the FBI. Smith says, what are you talking about? That's way outside the scope. He says, you want to bring in other evidence? So you'll notice here how the hula hoop expands and contracts based upon the side that you're on. If you are a useful witness to the government, then you can sort of explore all the different tentacles and wherever they go. But if you're on the defendant side, you don't really get that much because they just decide it's not relevant. They give the benefit of the doubt to the FBI. You don't need to go explore Agent Nicole Miller or any of these other problems in the case because it's irrelevant. However, in other situations, it seems like the judge is finding them relevant. Says here, the judge is skeptical of Smith's position. He says, Your Honor, Smith. Your Honor, these are inflammatory remarks that not even the witness made, okay? Aaron is on the stand. He didn't say these things. Somebody else who was in a chat with him, who's not even on trial, somebody named Cooney, said some other bad things. And the government, only because they have the confidential human source in, and he was in a group with another bad person, or another bad message that they want to get included as evidence, they say that hula hoop should be expanded to cover that. Defense says, these are way too inflammatory. And these are also on the theory that maybe he saw them, he should have told the FBI. He had no obligation to do that, I'm guessing is what his argument was. The judge says, yeah, but he was a part of these group chats, these chat groups, and they're within days of January 6th. So the judge is just wanting to get these in. He says, this is going to get kinetic quick. He says his whole testimony was, I was surprised. Someone he was closely associated with was saying it was going to get kinetic, and he said that I got surprised, and he shouldn't have been surprised because somebody else in the chat said this is going to get kinetic. And so I want to impeach him with that statement saying I was surprised. He shouldn't have been surprised. And the prosecutor wants to get in more external evidence to make this case look worse. The defense says, Your Honor, if the witness says he didn't see it, then he can't be impeached with it. Judge says, yeah, but putting aside whether he saw the statement, he testified. He said, I was surprised by what happened. So I don't see how this doesn't. Defense says, Your Honor, the chat is about Antifa, not about the Capitol. This is the government's whole bait and switch. And the defense attorney for Biggs, Norm Pattis, stands up. He says, Your Honor, I think Smith is right, by the way. Okay, he laid a foundation. You can't impeach a person by third-party statements. Those are the rules. And the judge says, oh, yeah? Well, these are percipient witnesses of what happened that day as to what they saw and expected. And he says, so let me just ask this one question. He goes over to the prosecutor. He says, okay, Mr. Mulrow. He says, look, if you ask him about this on cross-examination, and if he says, I didn't see them, then I don't think you can get them into evidence. Now, you can ask about them, but you cannot put them into evidence. The prosecutor says, that's great, Judge. I think that's right. But I fully expect him to say he remembers them. Okay, it was a small chat. And the defense says, Your Honor, if the witness hasn't seen them, then what is being impeached if this is not in the record? Prosecutor says, well, if he claims he's never seen them, then I'd be inclined to move on at that point. But there's an argument that if he's in this small group and he didn't see it, then it raises issues about his powers of observation. So the judge says, all right, listen, prosecutor, I'm going to permit you to put them up on the screen and ask about them. Roger Roots, defense attorney for Pizzola, stands up and he says, if you rule this is open, we'd like direct then. They want a direct exam Aaron, which they didn't want in the first place, but now they do because they want to ask about this stuff. So the prosecutor says, that's fine. You can have a direct exam. Smith says, all right, let's go. Move on to cross. Root says, okay, give me just a quick 5 minutes, Your Honor. Can I talk to these other attorneys? I'm going to actually think about that direct exam. Let me discuss whether I want to do the direct exam before Mulrow does his cross. After consultation, Root says, you know what? Actually, we're not going to do a direct exam anyways. All right. So forget about that. I retract it. Prosecutor says, okay, finally, it's my turn. He begins cross of the witness. Now, his name is Aaron. He's a Proud Boy confidential human source reporting to the FBI on January 6th. And again, it's amazing. There were confidential human sources all over the place. At least 8, I think, by many conservative counts, as many as 15 in the Proud Boys themselves. And definitely more than that around. We've talked about many of them here on the day of January 6th. If it was so orchestrated and so conspiratorial, and they had 15 or 8 even informants in there, how did it get so far? How did the very intelligent FBI agents allow it to almost succeed by running away with the podium? Maybe they wanted it to. So a prosecutor comes back out. He says, all right, Fed informant. He says, you first developed a connection with the FBI when? Around 2008 or so? Defense attorney objects. Your Honor, that's beyond the scope. I didn't ask about that. He says, that's overruled. Prosecutor can continue. 2008 sound about right? Yeah. That was about 12 years before January 6th, right? Yeah. About 8 years before the Proud Boys started? I'm not sure about that. Now, within the FBI, there's an official term for people who provide info. Is it called CHS? Is that right? Yeah. But that's not a term that you'd have used? Right. And it's not a full-time job, is it? Correct. And it did not define your identity as a human being? Correct. This is a DC prosecutor, by the way. So they're very into identity. So you know that Jen Lowe was upset that she got identified as a CHS. She said, I can't believe they're calling me a rat. I can't believe they're calling me a Fed. I can't believe how polarized this country has become. She didn't identify as a Fed. I get it now. And the prosecutor is being clear with him. He doesn't identify as a Fed rat either, just like Jen Lowe doesn't either. Very inclusive. They're free to make their decisions. It didn't define your identity? No, it didn't. I definitely didn't feel like one. Okay. So even though the FBI considered you as a source, you had a whole personal life that the FBI didn't know about or didn't care about. He says, well, I had multiple lives. You joined the Proud Boys in 2019. Is that true? Yeah. Now, what drew you was, you said, a channel of energy. Is that right? He said, yeah, and a libertarian leaning, not as extreme as other people I'd known over the years. So you'd say you had some affinity for the group's views. Is that true? Yeah, partially. And part of what drew you in was the history of fighting Antifa? Objection. Overruled. He said, well, I saw them standing up against something that appeared overly aggressive. I was watching people getting jumped by Antifa, and I was seeing someone else try to prevent that. It was exciting to watch on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe. He says, so when you were there, part of the Proud Boys, one of the things you'd talk about would be standing up to physical force. Is that true? No, sometimes just being there was enough. But you did use the word fighting, though. Yeah. And when you joined the Proud Boys, that was not something the FBI directed you to do. True? Correct. And the FBI did not embed you in the Proud Boys, right? Right. And if somebody said the FBI embedded you in the Proud Boys, that would be false. Correct? Correct. According to these two guys. Get a room. Now, you didn't just go to the FBI and tell them what you figured they might want to know, right? They provided guidance to you. Yeah, they provided guidance like don't use your camera. Now, the FBI never asked you to look for info about the Proud Boys, right? Right. And throughout your time, you didn't see the need to report to the FBI about the Proud Boys, right? Correct. And you didn't hold leadership positions, though, in the Proud Boys, right? Right. Only a second degree. Correct. Not a third degree, which would have required a tattoo. Correct. Not a fourth degree, which would have required you to fight Antifa. Objection, misstates the fact, sustained. You didn't have a free pass to commit crimes, right? Correct. But there were times when your work as a CHS, an informant, when it required you to possess things that weren't otherwise legal for you to possess, correct? Objection, overruled. He says, you mean like, what, drugs or guns? No, I don't recall that. Sidebar. Prosecutor says, so you never remember signing a form that authorized you to do very limited activities that might otherwise be unlawful? He says, no, I don't remember that. I signed some form saying I was not being pressured. You never signed a specific instruction that you were authorized to act illegally with respect to the Proud Boys, correct? Correct. Now, you could do something minor to protect your own safety. You could do graffiti or something, right? Yeah. But you wouldn't be allowed to shoot someone, would you? No, not at all. You traveled to D.C. because you wanted to, not because the FBI directed you to. Is that right? Yeah. He says, they said if you can find out if a certain person would be there and find out his motivations, that'd be good. Not someone connected to this case, not a Proud Boy. Now, the December rally before January 6th was a powerful experience for you, wasn't it, Aaron? He says, yeah, it was a pretty interesting experience, yeah. He says, yeah, I think that I used the term that we were treated like rock stars. He says, I was surprised at their reaction. There was kind of this vibe there. He said that you said something like, there had never been another time in your life that people were so happy to have you around. Is that what you said? Yeah, that was my interpretation of the situation. And that was because you're a Proud Boy, right? Yeah. Now, you believe that more than 1,000 Trump supporters joined the Proud Boys that day? Yeah. And that made you more effective at keeping Antifa under control. Is that true? Yeah. And after December, you drove 18 hours all the way back home. Yeah. And then you became aware of January 6th. Yeah. He says, yeah, at first, our chapter was not thinking about attending. Our chapter's leadership didn't condone it. But some are going anyway, and there were reports that Antifa would infiltrate the crowd, dressed up like Trump supporters. You don't say. So your chapter put together guidelines. Is that true? Yeah. And they said that conflict was almost certain. Yeah. And that if you get in trouble, that's on you, right? And the chapter's not going to help you. Right. And you don't remember concerns from chapter leadership about all the aggression on the prior rally in December? He says, well, I recall one guy who was thinking he'd become a fourth degree, but was told no, okay, just fighting is not enough. You've got to have sacrificed. Was told that we had to remain defensive. Now, part of your chapter, is this true, Aaron? They didn't approve of Enrique Tarrio's leadership style. Objection sustained. Moving on. He says, now, you had a Proud Boy chat group. Do you remember being in those? Yeah. Do you remember one that had you and Chris Cooney in the chat group? Yeah. He used some pretty heated language. You remember that? No, I don't recall that. No, actually. Prosecutor says, well, I want to show you this chat. Smith, objection. Foundation. He's trying to keep this out now. This is the prosecutor trying to squeeze this one in here. Slide it in here. Smith's ready to go. Overruled. Judge is going to allow him to claim this. Do you recognize the name Chris? He says, yeah. Do you recall that message? Here it comes. No, I don't recall it because there were so many messages. Whew, it's getting close. Is he going to recognize this? Prosecutor tries harder. You don't recall a chat group with only 13 people in it? You can't remember that? Yes, I can't remember that. And you had travel arrangements and everything taking place in this chat, right? Yeah. You put accommodations in here. You put cars in here. But you didn't keep up with those messages? He says, well, I had to sometimes ask extra questions to catch up. They were talking all the time. And you don't remember that message from Chris either? He says, I don't remember a lot of them. Okay, my thoughts hadn't been focused on trying to remember those. Now, this one at the bottom, you don't remember that one either? No, I don't remember that. How about this one? You remember this? No, I don't recall it specifically. How about this one? The judge is just letting it go on. I don't recall that either. So nothing you saw in here indicated that you felt you needed to report it to the FBI? He says, no, that one was in the middle of the night. Now, you understand there are timestamps on here, right? Yeah. And sometimes those are off by hours, right? He says, this one's off by 6 hours from Central Time, isn't it? I don't know. Is Ryan Ashlock also a member of this chat? Yeah. He said some wild things too, didn't he? I was told that. He says Ashlock said something about burning Antifa's eyes out of their sockets, didn't he? I'd been told that by another party. And you told him he better not say things like that, didn't you? Yeah. And Billy Chrisman was a member of the chat too, wasn't he? Yeah. And you later considered him to be one of the instigators of J6, didn't you? Later I did. Now, how did you get over to Washington, D.C. on the 6th? So as we parked in the parking garage and took something into the city. It was an 18-hour drive to D.C., wasn't it? Yeah. The FBI didn't direct you to do that, right? Correct. They said if you were going to go, you could try to find out this info. Prosecutor says, well, I want to ask you about the morning of the 6th. Where did you go? Well, I went over to Harry's. Why'd you go there? Well, I didn't know what else to do. One of the reasons you went was probably because you needed to be in a position to know things, right? Yeah. And prior to January 6th, did you know who Enrique Tarrio was? He says, well, I knew of him. I once took a selfie with him in the background. Hey, it's Enrique. Hey. Now, you didn't do that for the FBI, did you? You just thought that was cool? Well, yeah, he was a public figure. He was kind of like a movie star out there, you know? But you never had contact with Ethan Nordine? Not to my knowledge. Biggs? No, not to my knowledge. Mulrow, prosecutor shows him a photo. You saw this sometime from the FBI after January 6th, didn't you? Yeah. Now, when you saw this photo, I think you labeled this person as Briggs. Didn't you? Do you remember that? It's not Briggs, right? It's Biggs. Isn't that right? And you also couldn't correctly identify Nordine. You couldn't identify Pizzola. You really didn't know Real. He says so you can pick any of these people out of a crowd, right? Right. And you're not in the elders group. You're not in the leaders group. You're not in the self-defense group. You're not in the ops group. You're not in the boots in the ground group. You're not in Space Force or Street Sweepers or Pickleback, are you? No, I'm not in any of those. And you had zero access to the Proud Boys leadership, right? Yes. And you had zero access to the MOSD leaders, correct? Correct. And you had zero access to the Proud Boys planning for J6? Correct. Prosecutor says, now, do you remember reaching out to your local chapter president from Harry's? And that person told you to go to the Washington Monument? Yeah. He says, you never saw this message though, right? It's a message about not wearing colors. Prosecutor says, you were there. And when you got to the Washington Monument, at that time, did it become clear that Rufio Nordine was in charge? He says leadership wasn't communicating much to you, was it? Right. And you just followed everybody around from place to place, right? Yeah. And you were surprised that they were walking you so much as walking around? Yeah. You wondered how they expected you to fight Antifa later after all this marching, didn't you? Yeah. While you guys were marching, did the word revolution come to mind? Aaron says, well, I did worry about that because Trump supporters were so angry. There were a few people that came by and were screaming at cops. Prosecutor says, on January 4th, you used the phrase color revolution in the chat. Do you remember that? What do you mean by that? He says, yeah, well, hopefully something like that didn't happen after watching the Spring Revolution in Egypt, maybe, and the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. He says maybe something like that would happen. So 2 days, the prosecutor says, 2 days before J6 then, guys in your chat, they were also talking about the National Guard, right? Yeah. You said it would be funny if National Guard turned on the left and it would be a color revolution. You remember that? Yeah, I do. I was joking. Like, what if something like that did happen? Like the farthest thing possible. Okay. Prosecutor says, I want to show you this picture. Do you see a guy with a camo suit and a baseball bat in his hand? Yeah. You recognize him? Yeah. He approached you on January 6th, didn't he? Yeah. What did he say to you? He said, are you a militia? He was all alone. He wanted to know if he could walk with us. Prosecutor says, and what did you tell him when he asked if he could walk with you? He said, yeah, I could. I told him that he could hang for a bit, but thought that he wouldn't be allowed to march. Prosecutor now shows an excerpt of a montage video. He says, now, did you know about a brother and sister from Arizona who joined up with the Proud Boys? Somebody walks up, taps him on the shoulder. Can we march with you? Defense attorney asks for a sidebar and gets it. Now, Roger chimes in here and he tells us that the defense attorney has been objecting continuously all along. He's been just outraged. Outrage, right? Disbelief and contained outrage throughout this entire inquisition. Irrelevant, beyond the scope, 403, lack of foundation, just riddling the transcripts with objections. Judge doesn't care. Overruled, 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 overruled. Prosecutor, whatever you get, you're good to go. Exploring all of this stuff, which was not even asked on direct exam. Where does this even come from? We're talking about Billy Christman and more marches and all over like it's almost like they're prosecuting this guy now. Let's listen. Prosecutor continues. Do you remember if Billy Cressman consulted with Ethan Nordine about whether a brother and sister could march with you? No, I don't know. Well, I want to show you this transcript. What does this say? He says that's a reference to when we'd walk around to the other side of the Capitol building, at which point a group approached. And we were told that they had to stand in the back and they couldn't stand in the ranks. Prosecutor asks, but there was a guy with fatigues on. He had a helmet. He had a baseball bat. He was allowed to march with the group, wasn't he? He says, I don't remember seeing him again. I did run into him in the building later, but I didn't remember him then. Prosecutor says, now I want to show you how Aaron was dressed. He's wearing a zip tie, handcuffs. He's got a tactical vest. He says, Aaron, tell me about your outfit. He says, well, I was given those at a food truck. He said, another Proud Boy gave me some aspirin, ibuprofen. What were these? He says, well, I thought it was like a unique memento or something. They're now talking about the food trucks. They're talking about the clip of the march. Prosecutor is asking about other people who were there. Somebody had an axe in their hand. Number of people from Arizona. Aaron is IDing all of these people. So there's a bunch of other people there. Ryan Ashlock, Chris Cooney, Billy Cressman. None of these people are being charged, but they're all being discussed here. Prosecutor says, so you were all in this group together and you marched up to the Peace Monument, and shortly after that you went back past the barriers. As you said, you were 2/3 or 3/4 of the way back, right? Yeah. And you told the FBI that you were more than 100 people back when the breach occurred, right? Yeah. Playing the video. So this person filming this is pretty close to the crowd. Yeah. And where are you back now? He says maybe about 20 people back. This is Zachary Reel's videos. And he said, we're watching you. And now we see you, right? Yes. And you were chanting? Yes. You hear that voice? You hear that voice that says, F 'em, storm the Capitol. Who was that? He says, well, I just heard that voice now. We know from FBI agent Nicole that was Zach Reel's voice. Prosecutor says, and we now see you on the screen, don't we? Yeah. And the video plays forward. And this video is Billy Cressman, very close to the front ranks, and he's breaching the barrier, isn't he? That's him at the front scrambling over the snow fencing? Yeah. You see those officers running away? Yeah. You see yourself following right behind? Yeah. Now, following after those officers who were running away, right? You're following after them? No, not after the officers. He says hundreds of people were coming behind you, weren't they? Yeah. They're all screaming, fight for Trump, fight for Trump. The prosecutor, every time the prosecutor can play a video and walk through it, they're going to do that. So this is just really, devastating for the defense that this just continues to happen over and over and over again. It's just, you see it enough, it's going to reprogram your brain, and it doesn't really matter what you're listening to here. It just matters what you see. So the prosecutor wants to show this over and over and over again, and they're getting it in. I'm imagining the defense attorney is just out, objection, again, judge, it's totally irrelevant. My clients are not even in this video, and they're outraged about it. But this is the government. This is DC. We know how this trial's been going. So they continue. That's you on the right side marching towards the Capitol? Yeah. And you turned back and you saw all those people? Yeah. Continue playing the video. You're walking with some purpose, aren't you? It looks like you know where you're going. He says, well, I wouldn't say with purpose. I was feeling tired. That vest is pretty heavy. Having all those Proud Boys with you made you feel pretty powerful, huh? Just like in December, kind of like Batman out there, didn't it? No. Now we're near the terrace of the Capitol and we're approaching the fence. You see this? Yeah. Do you see people throwing barricades aside? Yeah. Prosecutor points out William Pepe. Do you recognize this guy? No, I actually don't know who he is. Here's another shot of him removing barricades. He says, what were you thinking then? He says, well, why were you there? People were under the impression that Antifa would be infiltrating, and so we wouldn't actually get hurt by each other. They passed around tape at that thing. A lot of guys put tape on. They fast forward. They say, and you're right up there at the front still, right? You're at the front of this pack? He says, yeah, at the moment there. And Billy Cressman is waving people forward, isn't he? Yeah. And you thought the Proud Boys weren't the ones inspiring, right? He says, well, I sent that text earlier in the day. They play the video. In this video, you're not making any effort to de-escalate this, are you? Well, at that time, I was still surprised by everything. I told myself, don't involve yourself. But you also told yourself, don't leave, didn't you? Well, I thought it was an emergency situation and I might be asked about it. Aaron is now near a black metal fence. Ask him a question. Objection overruled. Aaron, you were right up there, right? Almost against the fence. He says, yeah, I was there. I did retreat later. And when you were up there, you were surrounded by other Proud Boys? Yes, he says. And other Trump supporters. Says, that's Rufio up there, isn't he? I don't recall him being there at the time. But you recognize him? Objection overruled, of course. Yeah, I recognize him. Now, you're right near the guy with Biggs, aren't you? Yeah. And you mentioned that you understood the FBI was going to want to know about this, right? Yeah. At that point, I was under that assumption. There was a whole lot of video being filmed around you, wasn't there, Aaron? Yeah. And you watched some of that before your interviews? He says, yeah. Specifically, I watched a lot of the Wall Street Journal videos. And you had plenty of time to think about videos that might have you in them before your FBI interview, correct? You were watching this? He says, yeah. And you wanted to make sure you didn't incriminate yourself? He says, I wanted to make sure I was accurate, okay? I answered what questions my FBI agent had for me. And you volunteered to the FBI that you might have grabbed that fence. Do you remember saying that? He says it was a different fence that was gray, not the black fence. You told the FBI you grabbed the fence, but you were trying to put it back up. You remember that? Yeah, he says, yeah, it had been kicked. I was trying to put it in the opposite direction from which it had been kicked. Oh, really? Plays the video. You see here in this video that you were not making any effort to de-escalate the crowd. Would you agree? He says, I was thinking surely it was not going to go past this point, right? At this moment, he's on the video. It doesn't look probably good. I don't think it's going to get worse than this. But that's you pumping your fist in the air, isn't it? Yeah, at that point, it was almost like a circus before it got serious. Kind of exciting, wasn't it? He says, it was funny, yeah. Now, that's you at the bottom of the screen. You're still up right near the metal fence, yeah. That fence came down eventually, didn't it? Yeah. Plays the video forward. We watch the crowd pass through. Is that you helping a lady up the stairs? He says, yeah, I didn't want her to get stepped on. You hear everyone around you chanting, whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. You hear that? Yeah. That's a Proud Boys chant, isn't it? He says, yeah, a lot of people use that. A collection of Trump supporters and other groups, they all say that. You see the police around this area. They're all trying to restore order. Yeah. You see them using crowd control measures. No, that hadn't started yet. But they started to at some point. Yeah. And those crowd control measures were so close to you that you felt the concussions, didn't you? Smith is still objecting. Like bloody murder. Scope 403, relevance, foundation, judge. Judge, will you please quiet down over here? We're convicting your client. Stop it. Prosecutor says, you were so close. You could feel the concussion against your legs. He says, well, when they started using crowd control measures, they started firing a device that projected them over the crowd into the middle area, and it would cause people to part in the middle. He says, yeah, I was able to feel the concussion. And you knew police were trying to get people to leave? Yeah. And you knew that people trying to stop what was going on inside? Well, I can't recall that. You knew that people were shouting to stop the vote? I don't recall that. You texted that to the FBI? He says, you said it right here, didn't you? Yeah. You knew this was going to look very bad for you, didn't you? No, I don't recall having that thought. Of course not. He's an FBI informant. He's fine. He didn't get charged with anything. And it was at that point you texted the FBI saying the Proud Boys didn't do this, right? He says, no. He says that message was received by the FBI at 12:02 Central Time, right? Objection, misstates, overruled. That was the time it was received. He says, yeah. Now I want to show you this closed circuit TV footage of the west side of the Capitol. 12:46, the very first rioters are beginning to arrive. 12:58, they've spread out along the black metal fence. Crowd breaks through. 12:58. He says, okay, now in this video at 1:02 Eastern, the crowd has taken over, it looks like the entire lower plaza. And that's when the FBI received the message. Yeah, that's when they received it. He says, I'd sent it earlier, but I'd look down at the phone and it would just say sending. It would just say sending. FBI asked me about it. All the cell towers were down. On 1/13, on January 13th, you met with the FBI. Is that true? Yeah. And you told them that you sent it before it went through the first barrier, right? You said you sent it and then it broke. He says, yeah. And then in April, when you met with them again, you told them as soon as you saw the crowd moving forward is when you texted them, right? He said, yeah, I was in shock. That's when I texted him. And then the third time when you met with the FBI and the lawyer, they kind of pushed you on that, didn't they? Yeah. They pointed out there was a little bit of a time discrepancy in what you were reporting. Yeah. And you didn't say anything that time about it taking time to send, right? Yeah. So now more than 2 years later, you're now suddenly saying it wouldn't send. He says, well, I did mention it to the agent. Judge says, okay, this is a good time to break. Everybody, we're going to go to lunch and we're going to come back. Don't talk about the case. And we'll see you in a short minute. Now they come back. We fast forward through it back on the bench, 135. They're showing them photos. Judge Kelly's back on the bench. Carmen Hernandez is having a conversation with the judge. He says, hey, Carmen, what is the relevance of the documents that you want to talk about with your next witness? I don't see why we need those. He says, I understand the relevance of the permits. They're talking about permits around the Capitol. But what's the relevance of all the other documents? And she says, well, Your Honor, these documents were produced by the government and they inform the permit process. Says, this is how they got the permit. I'm not sure what docs are that they want to exclude. He says, well, everything except the permits themselves. And Carmen says, well, it informs the permit process. Like, they got the permit, but the permit process is what I want to talk about. And the judge says, well, what's the relevance? Well, I can think of a lot of things about the relevance. Why would they get a permit for an insurrection? First of all, is a good question. If they are going to be stealing the country, probably not going to need a permit. And if they're applying for a permit, I'm curious if the application was to set up guillotines for an insurrection and whether that was approved. So I've got a lot of questions about the application, not just the stamp of approval. So Hernandez says, well, the estimated number of participants, the kinds of placards that will be used. The judge says they're out. You can't articulate a basis for relevance. I'm sure she did. She says, it's not fair, Your Honor. What the heck? We're trying to show their intent. You're trying to show there's a conspiracy that they wanted to steal the country. We're trying to show they got a permit, and we want to talk about the permitting process. He says, sorry, you can't articulate a basis for relevance. Everything else is relevant against the defense. For example, the last witness. We just got to hear about a whole side story about this witness getting concussion blasted in the legs. Had nothing to do with anything, but the judge let it in, found that relevant, doesn't find this relevant at all. Judge says, Miss Hernandez, I'm talking. I'm the judge. I've indulged a lot of time talking over me, but I'm not going to permit it. Says, if you can come up with some other basis for this one before your witness is called, then I'll hear you. Hernandez says, Your Honor, didn't intend to talk over you, but I got to be clear here. This violates my client's Sixth Amendment rights. I object to the court asking me on the fly to justify why I'm offering these exhibits when they've had these documents for a long time. He says, I'm not going to hear from you anymore, Carmen. Sit back down, Miss Hernandez. You may return to your seat. I'm not hearing from you anymore. Return to your seat. Return to your seat. Shout out to Carmen Hernandez, defense attorney, for fighting for her clients and doing it in the face of a court like this. Judge now asks for a sidebar. Not bringing in the jury or the witness. Prosecutor says, Your Honor, now bringing in the jury and the witness. We're back in session. Prosecutor starts the cross-examination again. Aaron. It's a pseudonym. We don't know who he is. Prosecutor says, now I want to ask about being relocated. You were there past the black metal fence here. Police started using crowd control measures. Remember we were talking about that? Yeah. Now, when you were there, you did have the power to walk away when you were near that fence? He says, yeah, but I hadn't received any info back about what to do from the FBI, so I wasn't sure what to do. You thought it might be helpful to observe, to stand around and sort of observe what was going on? Yeah. And you took some photos and videos, didn't you? Yeah. And you provided some of those to the FBI? Yeah. But not others, right? He says, well, actually, they flashed my whole phone, so they got everything. Should have had everything there. You didn't delete anything from your phone? No, I don't remember. You were aware there were other guys from your chapter? Yeah. You had some influence over them? No, they wouldn't listen to me much. But Ryan Ashlock respected you and he listened to you, didn't he? Well, you'd have to ask him. I don't know. You told him to get back from the front line. Remember that? Well, he was covering his eyes and I had to bring him back. I had to get him to calm down. And he was a first degree, right? So he might have listened to you. Objection sustained. You never suggested, Aaron, that any of your guys should leave, though, did you? You thought you were making history, right? I don't recall if I had that thought. Oh, I want to show you an exhibit here. Objection, relevance, overruled. Judge says, talk about it, whatever you need. Prosecutor says, does that refresh your memory? He says, yeah. Yeah, Aaron was saying they were making history. Also compared it to the civil rights movement. Aaron says, it's history. People are still talking about it. It's kind of like the Challenger explosion. Prosecutor says, I want to show you this video. Now, the FBI came and they got stuff from you, and you did not give this to them, but it shows a third breach. Proud boy from Florida named Milkshake. He's breaking through the police line as the crowd rushes up the stairs under the scaffolding. Defense objects again. Judge, this is cumulative. They keep playing the same thing over and over again on repeat, which is exactly their strategy. Judge says, we love this video. I love seeing it. It's on repeat at home. And so they overrule it and it continues to play. Prosecutor says, perfect. You told the FBI that you mostly stayed toward the back of the crowd, right? Well, back and left during most of the flashbanging. That video showed people pushing up those stairs, right? He says, yeah, there was a lot of pressure from the crowd. And that's Cooney with the helmet? Yeah. And that's you standing right next to him close to the scaffolding, right? Yeah. And that scaffolding is where the crowd is pushing through. You see that? Yeah. And while you were out there, you saw Chris Cooney pass a fire extinguisher to someone. You see that? Objection. Defense is screaming. Scope. Relevance. 403. More harmful than it is helpful. More prejudicial than it is probative. Sidebar. Judge sustains that one. Fire extinguishers not coming in. Good Lord. Finally, the defense catches a break. Wonder if the prosecutor was going to say that was the fire extinguisher that killed Brian Sicknick. Which is not true. Prosecutor says, okay, we'll leave the fire extinguisher out. Judge says, we're not going to talk fire extinguishers here. Now, there came a time when you went up those stairs. Is that true? Yeah. He says, I paused a moment at the top. I was trying to observe the scene. But you were near Billy Cressman, though, weren't you? No, I don't recall that. Do you recall hearing what Billy Cressman said? Objection. 403, Your Honor is already ruled. Sidebar. There came a time when you decided to go in the building. Remember that, Aaron? Yeah. You knew that was wrong, though, right? Well, I thought it would be acceptable if it was to prevent worse acts from happening inside. You knew it was illegal, and that's why you hesitated, though, isn't it? No. He says no. No. And you tried to give Chris Cooney an excuse, didn't you? Objection sustained. You and Chris went in together, right? Yeah. And you knew it broke the law. He says, I did not receive authorization before going in. And later, you gave the FBI a justification. Right? Yeah. And your justification to them, not them to you, was that you knew there was a lot of valuable artwork in there and you might be able to rescue the antiquities from the rioters. Right? He says, I think it was Louis Cologne who said that I hope they're not destroying historical antiquities. I assume that stuff might be in there. We might be able to stop people from destroying it. Now, you saw, says the prosecutor, you saw some people being forced from the building at that time, right? Yeah. And you understood there were far more rioters than officers, right? Yeah. And you understood that you'd make that disparity even worse if you were there. He says, no, actually, not by acting disrespectfully. I wasn't going to cause the problem. Plays a video. Now, you saw yourself and Chris walk up the Upper West Terrace shortly before you went inside, right? Yeah, it was a little while before we went inside. There's apparently a line of riot police facing off on the terrace. Smith, objection, objection, relevance, objection, cumulative, objection, waste of time. Judge says, I love it. We're going to do this all day. Sorry, Smith, sit back down. You can go sit in the corner with Carmen. Prosecutor continues, the officers have gas masks on? Yeah. They have batons? Yeah. The crowd is chanting, you're on the wrong side. Do you hear that? Yeah. Now, you and Chris walked right past those officers, didn't you? Yeah. And you decided that what would help was if you and Chris entered the building? No. Your feet weren't hurting you anymore then, were you? He says, no, I took some ibuprofen. And when we decided to go in, there had already been people streaming in there for a while. The line of police were not there anymore. But you told the FBI that day in the text that you entered about 30 minutes after the breach, right? And that was false, wasn't it? No, I'm not sure. Well, I want to show you video. Defense objecting. Scope, relevance, 403, sidebar. They come back. Prosecutor moves to a message. You see this message. It says, we entered the building 30 minutes after the breach. Did you send that to the FBI? Looks like I did. Now I want to show you video footage. Looks like a board comes through and you are there coming through the door at 2:25. Do you see that timestamp? So that's about 12 minutes and not 30 minutes, isn't it? Yeah. I see that you're filming there with your phone, aren't you? Yeah. And you didn't give that to the FBI, did you? Don't recall that. So the FBI asked you if doors were forced open and you told them that they were just opened, right? He says, yeah, that's how they were. And you didn't see fit to mention windows were smashed out beside the door? Well, I didn't think about that. Now, I want to show you something you said earlier. You said previously in your testimony that police were, quote, fleeing. You remember that? Yeah. The crowd that vastly outnumbered them was causing people to flee. Yes. That crowd was a crowd that you were a part of, wasn't it? Yeah. And there were times when officers would move away and the crowd would follow them, right? Yeah. Now, here's a video of officers trying to shut an interior gate to stop rioters from descending from the ceiling. One rioter puts a chair and an ashtray under it to stop it. Gates start ascending. Rioters throw the chair in the ashtray. Prosecutor says, now there's a guy in the goggles is a guy you picked up and marched with all day, right? He's the guy who came up to you? Yeah. And that's you in this video? Yeah. And this CCTV video has no sound, does it? Right. But you could hear things on that day, right? Yeah. Defense objection, cumulative, 403, scope. Once again, overruled. Prosecutor continues. There's a guy here on the far side of this video. He's sliding furniture. Do you see that? Yeah. Police are trying to push down that gate. Yeah. And you'd agree with me that the police wanted that gate closed. Objection, overruled. He says, yeah, I wasn't considering that when I put my hand on that man's shoulder. Objection, overruled. But the gates would have kept the officers safer. Would you agree with that? He says, I see the police wanted it down. Now, I want to focus your attention on the left side of the screen, Aaron. You and Chris moved the chair aside and you put a larger podium in the path of the gate. Do you see that? He says, I was being instructed to do that. Oh, by the FBI? No, by Chris. The gate was already blocked at that time. Did the FBI tell you to put that podium under the gate? No. So you and another Proud Boy put that podium under the gate, right? Yeah. And then you went past that gate to the lower level of the Capitol, didn't you? Yeah. And you thought there was an entrance to the house there. Yeah, I may be wrong. But then something happened that caused you to leave the Capitol. He says something, Roger couldn't pick it up. There's a video, police officers telling rioters something, can't hear it. Something happened and that made you realize it was really time to go, didn't it? I did leave at that time. And you met with the FBI a bunch of times after that? Yeah. And then after that, it became a matter of public speculation that you might be, objection, sidebar. Prosecutor continues. Now, there came a time after January 6th when members of the public speculated you might be an informant. Is that true? Yeah. It's a little hard for you, isn't it? Yeah. There are people out there who don't want you to be a CHS, right? Yeah. And you didn't want to hurt the Proud Boys in any way, right? Well, if somebody was accused of something they didn't do, I wanted to help. And if not, then no. No further questions. Prosecutor's done. Defense attorney apparently tweeted something that he deleted. Don't know what that was. Nick Smith is now on redirect. And again, this is a government informant and a Proud Boy. He says, okay, Aaron, so it's true, though, that you let agents know that you would be in D.C. Is that right? Yeah. And did they tell you not to go to D.C.? No. After that, did they tell you that you had done something wrong in going to D.C.? No. And if we fast forward to January 6th, someone told you in your chats that, quote, conflict was almost certain. You remember that? Well, I just saw it today. You think that was about Congress? He says, no, that was about self-defense and about Antifa. So sometimes the messages in the chats, they were sometimes hyperbolic. Is that true? He says, well, define hyperbolic. He says, not meant to be taken seriously. Yeah. Remember when you spoke to the FBI and you mixed up a photo of Nordine with another defendant? Yeah. In another interview, were you able to identify Rufio? I don't remember. Do you recall referring to Nordine as Rufio in April 2021? Yeah. Is the man with the backward baseball cap Nordine and Rufio? Yeah. Smith is now showing him a text message. He said, you sent this text to the FBI. It says, PB did not do it, nor inspire. The crowd did it as a herd mentality. You remember that? He says, yeah, it's what I witnessed, and it's what I believe to be true. I may have misunderstood the situation, but I believed it at the time. Smith says, well, I want to ask you about another text. This is referring to the first breach. Smith says, what happened here? He says, well, I tried to send the message, but it was delayed. There was heavy cell phone traffic. And you've been consistent in telling the FBI that, right? Yes. So you're telling the truth right now, too. He says, well, I'm not a technical guy, though, but that's what I believe was happening. I don't know why it wasn't sending, but that's what I tried to do. Did the FBI agents, Aaron, ever tell you that your text was a lie? No. And when you said the Proud Boys did not do this nor inspire this, did you mean nothing wrong happened at all? No. So you mean that your initial breach was spontaneous is what you saw. From my perspective, yeah, it appeared spontaneous. And after your FBI handler got your text message, did he tell you to leave? No. I want to show you this exhibit. It's a close-up view of the breach near the peace circle. Defense says, you know, the prosecutor was asking you about this guy called Billy Cressman. Remember that? Yeah. Did he say something about Billy kicking down a fence? He says, yeah, the way he worded it, it made me think it was the first fence. Do you see him in this shot here? No. Do you see this person here? He says, yeah, he's talking about Ryan Samsel, who was standing next to Ray Epps. Do you recall seeing him? No. Are these people here pulling defense found, objection foundation sidebar? Roger fills us in. He says, Aaron has testified he was not near this. He was 100 people back. Mulrow is saying Aaron should not be asked about what he couldn't see at the time because he said he was too far back. Judge looks like he's going to allow it. Says, do you see Billy Cressman among any of these individuals? No. Do you see these individuals pulling the fence down? Yeah. Do you recognize any of them as being on the march with you? No. Now, do you see Billy Cressman among any of these individuals? No. And the prosecutor was asking you about Cressman interacting with Nordine, right? Yeah. Did you observe Nordine giving Cressman any directions? No, I don't recall that. Did you hear what Cressman said to Nordine? No. He said, I think I was led to believe that Nordine said it was okay to have other people walk with us. Defense says, well, at one point, the prosecutor suggested that you did not tell anyone to leave the premises, correct? Yeah. There's another video. Did you hear yourself say at the end, quote, let's go? Yes. Prosecutors showed you images of you taking phone videos and then accused you of deleting them before you spoke to the FBI. Did you do that? I don't recall. Defense says, should you have helped prop open the sliding metal protective door? He says, well, in hindsight, no. Police were trying to lower it. I shouldn't have helped with that. Did you send that text message because you had sympathy for the defendants, the Proud Boys? He says, no. I thought at that time it was the Trump supporters coming from the rally that had taken the barrier down, not the Proud Boys. Defense says, so you did tell the FBI about broken windows near the Senate doors, didn't you? He says, I thought I did. I want to show you this transcript. You recognize this? He says, yeah, I mentioned exiting out of a window. So did you feel the need to hide that from the FBI? He says, no, that's the direction officers were guiding us, out the window. Prosecutor also asked you about a man in fatigues with a baseball bat. He asked if he could join us, and I said yes. Did you ever see Nordine giving him directions? No. Would it have even been possible for leaders of that group to make and exhibit complete control? Who was in and out of the marching group? He says, well, that might have been better off to do. He says, were you able to observe? Were you able to see and hear what leaders of the group were doing? He says, yeah, for the most part. And that's your basis for saying you don't think that's the purpose was to invade the Capitol? Yeah. And that's why you don't think the purpose was to interfere with the police? Yeah. That's why I was concerned. We walked till we were tired. I assumed we'd be done marching and deal with Antifa later defensively. That's all. Smith says no further questions. They have a sidebar. Judge Kelly says we're going to take a break now. 10 minutes. Jurors, don't talk about the case. Attorneys, sit around and stick it out for a minute. Judge says, okay, listen here, attorneys. Now, I encourage you lawyers to talk to each other about this during the break. Sounds like some of the defendants want to ask additional questions in light of something that Smith brought out on redirect. He says, you guys deal with it. I'm going on break. They come back 10 minutes later. Judge Kelly's back on the bench. Hops on the phone with the lawyers. Finish on the sidebar. The judge comes back and says, all right, well, here's where we left it. The question is, what on cross-examination of Aaron has opened up this issue for another defendant to redirect? We've got co-defendants. Some of them are doing direct. Some of them can cross the same witness who's a defense witness. Carmen says, I directed. It's fairly short. He showed videos on cross. They're trying to figure out the sequence. Roger Roots, defense attorney for Pizzola, says, I want to ask about two little things. Very easy, Judge. He says it's easy. It's when Mulrow, the prosecutor, he said, the FBI pushed you hard about the timing of the text. I want to ask if there were threats or promises of payments. That's what I want to ask the judge. He said, He says the other question is that Pizzola was seen in a picture. I want to ask about who the scariest guy in the picture is. The point is, it's you. It's an FBI informant who got that guy into the march. The judge says, well, but that's not the testimony. He said Geishwin asked if he could join the march. And Pattis says, well, I recall Smith asking in redirect if Nordine took any affirmative steps to include him in the march. I want to ask the same thing. Prosecutor says, Your Honor, the appropriate question on when new counsel can get up is when there was something particular to their client. What we've heard from Roots doesn't have anything to do with Pizzola. I'm concerned with this exercise of every defense counsel. The judge says, yeah, Mr. Roots, your client was inserted into cross with that photo. So let's bring him out and ask the questions about the photo. Carmen says, Your Honor, I've got Miss Reel, Zachary Reel. She's sitting here with her baby. Father's been in custody for a nonviolent offense for the last 2 years. Judge says, okay, look, given where we are on the day, you can let Miss Reel and her baby go. Hernandez says, okay, well, thank you for that. Well, with respect to the sergeant, we had another witness coming up today. He says, I had prepared a direct based on the assumption I'd be able to use all my documents, the permit and the application for the permit, and you're not letting me use the permit application. And the judge says, Carmen, I don't want to burn time with the jury waiting. You'll have to demonstrate relevance. I already told this previously. She says, Your Honor, the application form itself talks about the First Amendment. She's trying again. The judge says, I'm not going to hear you right now. And she says, oh, I misunderstood. I thought you did want to hear it right now. Then we'll talk about it later. Bring in the jurors. Carmen Hernandez is up now doing a redirect of Aaron. Says the following. All right, FBI informant Aaron. You still didn't recognize my client, Zachary Reel, in any additional videos that you just saw. Did you recognize him? Did you see Reel knocking over fences or throwing things at police officers? No. No further questions. Roger Roots stands up. He shows this photo down here. Government Exhibit 499A. He says, you remember looking at this photo? Yeah. You agree with me that this guy, Geishwin over here, is the scariest guy in the picture? Objection sustained. In your opinion, who is the scariest looking guy? Objection sustained. He says, so it was you, an FBI informant, who got him into the Proud Boy March. Right? Objection misstates. It was you, through you, that he was able to get into the march. Right? He says, good question. Well, he didn't listen very well about staying back once we met up with the other Proud Boys. Roger Roots is done. Now the judge says, okay, I want to pause for a quick minute and give the jurors an instruction about Fernando Alonso's testimony, which was yesterday, the day before yesterday. He says, a reminder, everybody, about the First Amendment, that you have First Amendment protections, and stating that Alonso's discussions of violence are admissible only as to Alonso's state of mind. Okay, so if any of these other witnesses are saying things that sound violent, you can't attribute that violent to these defendants. You can only use that to go to his state of mind. You can't misattribute it to the defendants. We'll see, if the jurors can bifurcate those two things. We'll see. So Carmen Hernandez is now up. Judge educates us all about that, and we get our next witness. Seventh witness. Carmen Hernandez for Zach Reel says, Your Honor, the defense calls Blaine Endale. She's a woman, U.S. Capitol Police officer. Blaine, how long have you been a U.S. Capitol Police officer? She says, well, since 2003. What kind of work do you do? I focus mostly on special events. How long have you been doing that? For a long time. What rank do you have? I'm a sergeant. And how long have you been with that division? I've been with that section since 2017. What do you do there? Well, I oversee special event requests. What does that mean? Well, I take things that come in and I vet them and I process them. And do other people help you with these activities? Yeah. I supervise a number of people. And you guys process a bunch of applications, right? Yeah. Special events. Yeah. What kind of special events? Well, they are things like First Amendment activities, VIP notifications, events on the ground, congressional events, and other things. Like, for example, if a member of the public or if a congressman wants to hold a rally, they come through my office. That's great. Is there a process for this? Yeah. How do you do it? Well, we have a form. That's very easy. Go to the website, download the form. It's available online. I want to show you an exhibit of this. You recognize this? Yeah, it's the application form. Oh, that's great. It's a blank form up on the screen. So you can submit that online? Yeah, by email or just walk in. And who handles that when it comes in your office? Me. I'm the person. I process it. I would receive the application. Prosecutor jumps in here. Objection, relevance. And again, if they're planning an insurrection, I want to see the form to see if they're applying to steal the Capitol building and the U.S. Constitution like Nicolas Cage tried to do. I think he accomplished it, actually. They say, I'll check to see what the request is. She says, I get the email. I'll log in. I'll assign it to a coordinator. The judge overrules Nadia that we're allowed to talk about this. Assigns it to a coordinator and assign to coordinate with the organizer. What kind of things do you consider when they're making this application? Well, we might discuss how many people they're planning to have and other info on the form. We're asking about the scope of the event, whether it falls within our regulations and all of that stuff. If it's not within our regulations, we'll relay that back. Form includes where on the Capitol grounds they want to hold it. There are a number of different areas. They say, well, tell me about the different areas. How many of them are there? She says, a lot of them. In fact, there's 9 or 10 areas that are available to be permitted. They get requests quite often. It really is a lot of work. Everybody wants to plan insurrections, I guess. She says, that's interesting. So there are a lot of Americans who want to come to the Capitol to have demonstrations. You're kidding. She says, yeah, a lot. What happens after it comes in? She says, well, a coordinator completes the file. Once it's completed, it gets sent over to me to review. I review it and make a decision. If anything else is not answered, I tell the coordinator, go back to the organizer and get the info. The info is requested. And do they tell you what it's going to be? Like whether it's a rally or a vigil? Yeah. Like whether it's a march? Yeah. Whether they're going to have photography, things like that? Yeah. Road races, stuff like that. She says, yeah, there's foot races. We have all sorts of events. Musical presentations. Yeah. There's a section on the form for other. What is that? She says, well, if they click that, we're going to determine whether it falls within our guidelines. Great. Now on page 2 of this 11-page form, says Carmen, it asked if you have handheld signs, banners, or a podium. You see those? Yeah. Does the Capitol provide podiums? She says no. Organizers are required to bring their own staff and stuff. Do you guys distribute literature? Set the stage? Is there a press riser here? Yes. Lighting equipment, table, chairs. We can do all this stuff, right? You're allowed to do all of these things. You can set a stage. You can have a press riser. Checking the boxes. We want this. We want this. We want this. Is this a regular thing that happens at the Capitol? She says, yeah, happens all the time. Once a file is completed and it's within the regulations, it's then moved up through the process. The file has all sorts of notes in there. It includes a 303, a 1563, and other notes. Does it also include an attention memorandum? Something like that? Prosecutor, objection, relevance. Where's this going, Your Honor? Overruled. So a file gets generated for each application. Yeah. And the file includes various documents that are deemed necessary to this process. Yeah. And does that file go up to a police authority? What happens next? She says, well, it moves on to what we call the IICD. It's an interagency. I don't recall exactly what it stands for. But then it ultimately goes to the chief of police, doesn't it? Yeah. Do they do background checks and security checks? I don't know. I assume they do. Now, I want to move over to January 6th. Are you familiar with the permits that they were issuing on January 6th? Yes. Do you recall how many were granted for January 5th? No, I don't recall. How about on January 6th? Do you know? Yeah, there were 6. Now, the first request that came in, who submitted this one? Brian Lewis. She says, yeah, he wanted a permit 8:30 to 5 p.m. in the grassy area, 9. Apparently, they're going to have 50 people. They want handheld signs. They want placards. They got 1 bullhorn. They want no marshals. They're not requesting any electrical power. Easy. Here's a second permit. Jesus Lives. Tuesday, January 5th, they want grassy area 1. Wednesday, J6, they want area 15. They want banner stage, podium, solar generator, solar panels, and sound. Shout out to the Jesus Lives teched up crowd. Another permit, One Nation Under God. Andy Biggs, shout out to Arizona, is going to be there. They're going through this. Prosecutor objects. Defense continues. Now, the permit itself does not provide any explanation of what the purpose of the group is, does it? Right. But sometimes these files also include a special attention memo. Do you know that? She says, I don't know. I don't speak human. Special attention memorandum. What the heck is that? Can you tell me the form number? She says, yeah, it's 3P-303. She's like, oh yeah, that form. Now I know. I'm familiar with it. She reports. Does it have any info about what the demonstration is about? Yeah, it does. Shows the witness the form. Now, do you remember what Form 303 said about the purpose of this event? The Proud Boys event? Prosecutor, objection, relevance, hearsay. Really wants to keep this out for some reason. Now, do you recall whether this permit related to election fraud? I don't recall. If I show you the 303, would it refresh your recollection? And she says, yes, it does. It says demonstration for the election in various states. Move into evidence. Objection, sustained. Doesn't come in as evidence. Are you familiar with another form? Objection, sustained. Judge keeping this stuff out. Now, a fourth permit for January 6th. What area is this? It says this is the area 7. It's not on a map. And like other permits, people can bring props and equipment, right? Yeah. People like screws and generators and metal bike racks, right? Yes. We have another permit now. Women for a Great America, 50 Days of Blessings. Now, they were authorized to bring different props, weren't they? Yeah. What did they bring? Batteries, Bluetooth speakers, etc. No further questions, Your Honor. Carmen Hernandez finishes. Roger Roots, defense attorney for Pizzola, stands up to do the direct exam as well. And says, officer, were these events capped in... She's an officer from the Capitol Hill Police. Were these events capped in terms of attendance? Yes. 50 per location or 50 per event. Is there any enforcement for that? Have you guys checked the total numbers? She says, well, they're advised of that when they coordinate with us, and so we tell them. Are there any penalties if like 51 people show up there? Well, there could be. In your experience, do these event organizers have good ways of tracking attendance? Sometimes, yeah. How? Like with turnstiles or something? She says, no, if they know their invitations, that's how they determine. That's what they relay to us. Now, these events around DC, they're not cordoned off from the public, were they? No. So the public could wander in, right? Yeah. And as far as the attendees on J6, the people who attended the Trump speech, would they be likely to be interested in attending more than one of these events? Objection, sustained. If you attend one permitted event and want to move to another, objection, sustained. Have you ever seen another date with so many permitted events around the Capitol as January 6th? I don't recall. Did they typically walk from one demonstration to another? I don't know. If someone attends one and moves to another, they'd probably cut through the grassy areas? It's possible. People attending these events, at least one was an anti-Trump event, wasn't it? I don't recall. Were people walking through the Capitol to move from one event to another? Through the building? Objection, speculation, sustained. Roots is done. Now we get a cross-examination from prosecutor Nadia Moore. She takes the podium and says, all right, officer, I want to show you a map of these authorized demonstration areas around the Capitol. These are different colors, right? Yeah. And the red means that you can't go in this area. No demos are permitted. Is that true? Yeah. And this red area, it covers the Capitol building, doesn't it? Yeah, definitely. And yellow means this cannot be impeded at any time, right? And on January 6th, not all demo areas were available, right? For instance, Area 1 was not available on January 6th. Right, yeah, it was a restricted zone. So the only places where they were permitted demonstrations on J6 were outside these restricted zones, right? Yeah. And this permit indicates a number of participants limited to 50, right? Yeah. And the volume of any sound has to be kept at a minimum and directed away from congressional buildings, right? Yeah. No weapons are allowed, right? And those restrictions apply to all permits, right? Yeah. Now, I want to circle for you this pedestrian pathway from the Peace Monument over to the Capitol. Are demonstrators allowed to demonstrate on the sidewalk? She says, yeah, they can when there are no restrictions and if it's not impeding anything. But there were no permits for that on J6, right? Correct. And Area 1 was completely closed on J6, wasn't it? Correct. And yellow means can't be impeded at any time at all, right? Yes. Moore says, I want to show you a video of rioters swarming the walkway. We've got videos of Nordine and Biggs saying, oh my gosh, this is history. Woo-hoo-hoo. Hernandez, objection, Your Honor. Scope, move to strike. Sidebar. Prosecutor says, did this appear to depict a march? Says, yeah. There were no permits for marches on J6, were there? Correct. Does this look like it was more than 50 people? Yeah. And there's no permits for more than 50 people, are there? Correct. They're playing more video. And she asks this officer, the permitting officer, is there a walkway here? Yeah, it's Pennsylvania. Is this being impeded? Yeah. And that's not permitted, is it? Correct. Prosecutor shows a video of the Lower West Plaza. Objection, beyond the scope. Judge says, no, let it in. Perfect, let it in. Government says, thank you, Your Honor. I'll continue with this. Play some more. Showing Nordine in the front. Says, there's more than 50 people here in this video too, right? Yeah. Wouldn't have been allowed even if there had been a permit, right? Yeah. And this area is also impeded, isn't it? Yeah. Now they're showing this one on the west front. Was there a permit for this? Objection. Judge overrules. This was an Upper West terrace. And demos are never permitted there. It says, officer, is breaking Capitol property ever a permitted demonstration activity? Objection, sustained. Were Proud Boy organizers for any of the permits? No. Was Zach real? No. Was Tario? No. Was Biggs, Nordine, Pizzola? No. And the prosecutor was done. No further questions. We get some redirect here today. Carmen Hernandez is back up. She says, ma'am, is it possible for somebody to attend a demonstration even if they're not an organizer? She probably says yes. An event may be organized for 50 people, but a lot of people may join who are not tied to the organizer, right? Objection, sustained. Carmen says, Officer, I asked for an interview with you. I wanted to talk to you before this case started, and you declined. Is that true? I did. So this is a defense witness who's being called by the defense, who is a government employee, who is declining to even meet with the defense, and who is here essentially testifying because they've got nobody else, and they're trying to show movement and permitting. Let's see what she says. Did you meet with the prosecutors, though, before you testified? Yeah, I did for a brief moment. And there were many more demonstrations scheduled for J6 in and around D.C., weren't there? I don't know. Were you aware the president was having a huge demonstration on the ellipse? Yeah. And you were aware there were hundreds of thousands? Well, I don't know the numbers, but I do know they were large. And when there are large demonstrations, people tend to go to monuments and famous buildings. Is that true? Objection sustained. If people were coming from the rally to the Capitol, they would have come from the direction of videos you were shown, correct? Well, if it's coming from the west, then yes. And people are not supposed to impede, but people can walk in those areas, right? Yeah. And if you have large numbers of people walking in yellow areas, you can walk in yellow areas, right? She says, well, they are. There were many other demonstrations scheduled around the Capitol on the 6th, right? Objection asked and answered. She says, well, I know there were other events. The only thing I know is what was on the Capitol grounds. Do you have access to info from the Capitol Police Intelligence Branch? Objection, scope. Guessing she does not. Was one of the rallies scheduled, was that from Brian Lewis? Yeah. And the purpose of that rally was to urge Congress to do something with the election? Objection, overruled. She says, well, if that's what the thing says. Now Judge Kelly is asking for a sidebar. He says, are we about done here? Moore says, we're probably about done. Judge says, okay, well, we're going to call it for a day. Judge is excusing the jury. We don't know whether Hernandez is done and if the witness is done. The attorneys stick around for a little bit. The judge says, okay, we've got childcare issues for one of the jurors. I was hoping to get through the witness. Maybe we can work out a stipulation, finish up this witness without recalling her. Can we be done with her? Or are we done here? And says, we may get back to her tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm not sure. He says, I know we've got 2 witnesses scheduled for tomorrow. Is there a third? Carmen Hernandez says, well, I've got 2 more. We've got Jeff Finley. We've got Miss Reel. We're going to hear from Zach Reel's wife. I'd like to put Miss Finley on first, Jeff Finley, then Henry McGill or Mr. Gouffre, and then Mrs. Reel. I'm not sure of that order. But Carmen says, also, Your Honor, I just want to make it clear. It's very unfair of the government to object after I've prepared an examination based on records I thought would come in. She's still protesting the unfairness of keeping out her permit backup records and claims the judge is more lenient with the government than the defense. She says, Your Honor, from this end, it does not look like there's fair play in this courtroom. Shout out to Carmen Hernandez. Judge says, I don't care. Sorry you feel that way. Have a great night. See you all tomorrow at 9 a.m. Get the hell out of my courtroom. Goodbye. And that, my friends, is the end of trial. Day 46. Ultra shout out to Roger Parloff, who made this possible. He is over at rparloff on Twitter. 257 tweets from Roger. And the judge is just moving the train down the tracks. See you all tomorrow. Doesn't care if the defense attorneys are happy with him, as long as this thing doesn't go askew. And of course, we'll continue to cover it. That was day 46. We'll be back to cover day 47 tomorrow. I hope you join us. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing this with your friends and your family, and inviting them to come and watch this nonsense. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.